final goal is to grasp the native's point of view, his relation to life, to realize his vision of his world. Malinowski was born in 1884 in Krakow, Poland. He received his doctorate from the University of Krakow in 1908 in mathematics and physical science. He was particularly close with his mother, who then later sparked his interest in anthropology. In 1910, he completed graduate work at the London School of Economics. In 1921, he later became a lecturer of sociology at the same school. In 1927, he was made the school's first anthropology professor. He lectured at many established universities, such as Cornell and Yale. He had a strong background in language, speaking many himself, such as Polish, Russian, German, French, English, Italian, and Spanish. This later contributed to his fieldwork ethics in speaking and writing in the native languages of those that he observed. He passed away in 1942 in New Haven, Connecticut. He was heavily influenced by German psychologist William Wundt. It was with Wundt where he learned about current ideas of experimental psychology and historical economics. W.H.R. Rivers also provided Malinowski with significant academic guidance. He based his theory of individual needs off of Rivers' earlier work. James Fraser's book, The Golden Bough, about mythology and religion had a profound effect on Malinowski. He said, "No sooner had I read this great work than I became immersed in it and enslaved by it. I realized then that anthropology, as presented by Sir James Fraser, is a great science worthy of as much devotion as any of her elder and more exact studies, and I became bound to the service of a Frasian anthropology." Much intellectual and financial support came from Charles Slayman. In 1914, Malinowski traveled to Nauru, New Guinea for 6 months. There, he did not live with the natives or speak their language. This sparked his interest with a new approach in fieldwork study. He was most famously known for his work in the Trobriand Islands of New Guinea in 1915. It was here that Malinowski studied the natives and learned their language, wrote his field notes in their language, and set high standards for ethnographers. He drew new conclusions about the primitive natives that previous armchair anthropologists had never considered. He was able to see similarities instead of differences within the cultures. He brought scientific observations to anthropology to eliminate previous prejudice. He became one of the first anthropologists to conduct his research through participant observation. This new innovative way to conduct research had set a new standard for fieldwork. He did this by speaking the language, appreciating the natives' values, all while living with them. Malinowski advocated for the emic perspective. He wanted to understand people from their point of view, not from the researchers. One of Malinowski's findings were that the Trobrianders used ritual behavior as a form to reduce stress or anxiety. Their ritualistic behavior gave them a sense of control, such as their use of magic. They used magic in all aspects of their life, such as for gardening, fishing, or even love. For example, they used magic after voyages to rid themselves of spirits. This would calm their anxieties that they would bring anything of bad fortune back to their tribes. Another aspect in the Trobriander life that held much significance was the kula. Kula was an elaborate expedition for trade among many different islands. They would exchange these exotic gifts when they came home or when visiting friends. Another aspect of Trobriander lives that fascinated Malinowski was their idea of myths. All Trobrianders believed that they came from underneath the ground. They came up through a cave with all of their culture, magic, and customs already in place. They also believed that when a tribe member died, they would go to another island and continue to practice magic and kula, even in the afterlife. In 1938, Malinowski followed some of his students to South Africa. He began to study the South African issues of colonialism. Carlo Rossetti explains, in his study of South African society, Malinowski showed that the idea of harmonious cooperation between rulers and ruled did not fit the structure of the situation, nor the realities of domination and subjugation. He pointed out that the two groups, whites and Africans, were divided. He emphasized that the Africans had no voice in this setting. He saw the origins of this deeply divided society in the processes of world expansion, in imperialism and colonialism, and in the politics of governments whites had established in Africa. In 1940, Malinowski, in the last years of his life, began a new field study with the Zapotec people who lived in Oaxaca, Mexico. He studied the market systems of the peasants. Argonauts of the Western Pacific was published in 1922. Malinowski lived among the Trobrianders and studied their culture. He found that all the activities formed a social system, each dependent on the other. Crime and Custom in Savage Society was published in 1926. Malinowski again studied the Trobrianders and saw the relationship between law and society. He explains the true problem is not to study how human life submits to rules. The real problem is how the rules become adapted to life. The Sexual Life of Savages, published in 1929, was the observed behaviors of social phenomena such as courtship, marriage, and family life. He discovered that the different traditions within the Trobrianders' development through these social milestones mold the individuals into later different behavior from our own culture. Coral Gardens and Their Magic, published in 1935, indicates the Trobrianders' cultural expression through cultivation and practical magical rituals. In 1945, he produced The Dynamics of Cultural Change. In this, Malinowski discovered that cultural change must be observed and analyzed in its entirety. Magic, Science, and Religion in 1925 was about Malinowski's views on how magic, science, and religion fit in the cultural aspects. He believed that magic and religion fit very closely together for the Trobrianders in order to fulfill an individual's needs of mental comfort. The first paragraph of his book explains, "There are no peoples, however primitive, without religion and magic, nor are there, it must be added at once, any savage races lacking either in the scientific attitude or in science, though this lack has been frequently attributed to them. In every primitive community, studied by trustworthy and competent observers, there have been found two clearly distinguishable domains, the sacred and the profane. In other words, the domain of magic and religion and that of science." Malinowski is considered to be the founder of modern functionalism. Unlike Radcliffe Brown, who is also considered to be one of the founders of modern functionalism, Malinowski emphasizes the individual, while Radcliffe Brown emphasizes the function of the social system. Malinowski's functionalism is biologically and psychologically oriented. The text defines it as a transformation of the needs of the individual into secondary social needs, which underlies this point. In other words, all aspects of social life were created to serve needs. He believed there were 7 basic needs of man: nutrition, reproduction, bodily comforts, safety, relaxation, movement, and growth. These needs are satisfied by cultural and social institutions. Culture requires new requirements for these needs, such as the evolution of transportation. What Malinowski found to be important was how the society worked at the time that it was being observed, the legal, economic, symbolic aspects of the society. He was interested in how each need specifically functioned within the society. On page 274 of the text, it reads, "Every social institution has a need to satisfy, and so does every cultural item." He regards culture as a tool that responds to the needs of human beings in a way that is above any adaptation. In this sense, he is referring to that culture acts as a human's form of adaptation. We have needs that must be fulfilled, so we have created social institutions to satisfy those needs, just as families within a home serve to satisfy the need for nutrition, bodily comfort, and safety. He believed culture is created from the universal needs of the individual through complex societal needs. All institutions are created with a goal in mind. Education strives to increase a higher intellect into the population to better civilization, and serves to satisfy the need for growth. Malinowski argued that needs, environment, and culture all must be studied together. With the use of his improved ethnography strategies with participant observation, Malinowski was able to use functionalism to see the different parts of society and how they operated together. In 1967, the private diaries of Malinowski were published. The diary reveals his struggles with participant observation. The publication of a diary in the strict sense of the term caused many controversies surrounding the well-renowned anthropologist. Some believed it was an embarrassment to the profession, showing Malinowski's racist, harsh, and narcissistic views on the natives that he studied. Clifford Geertz called Malinowski a crabbed, self-preoccupied hypochondriac, narcissist, whose fellow feelings for the people he lived with was limited in the extreme. He labeled the diary itself gross and tiresome, and its author's examples embarrassing. Others denied the diary being an insight into the true Malinowski at all. Constantine Simons, a fellow ethnographer, explains the diary was a rather limited type of human document, a series of very private snapshots of an extremely complex person, taken without his permission, with limited value in terms of Malinowski's development as an ethnographer and a theorist. Although some viewed his writings as him showing his unfavorable personality traits, it is important to remain centered on the issue of time. Malinowski was one of the first anthropologists to come to the realization that observing a culture that speaks a language you do not understand makes their customs much more difficult to comprehend and appreciate. These feelings he previously felt in Melu and then began after the passing of his close mother, who introduced him to anthropology. He was the first to explore and learn another culture to the extreme degree. We must also see his point of view through an emic perspective and in the time period that he wrote it. Regardless of accusations against Malinowski's character, he is still one of the fathers of social anthropology. He applied participant observation with such detail, allowing for significant change to anthropology. He introduced the importance of knowing the language of a culture in which the researcher is studying. His topics were controversial for their time, but it made anthropology more widely known to the public. He brought a new stance on functionalism through the analyzation of the individual's needs and how different cultures address different needs. His advocacy for the emic perspective evolved anthropology into having more insight into the lives of individuals of different cultures. The skill requires the researcher to go outside of their comfort ethnocentric views and explore a whole new way of thinking.